The day I slid the new lease agreements under my property manager's door, I asked her to make sure they were hand-delivered to every unit in the building. All 14 of them. I didn't go myself. I didn't need to. I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you can do is not be in the room when the moment arrives. Let it find people on its own. Let it land exactly the way it was always going to land, without your face attached to it. But I knew exactly what was going to happen when my stepmother opened that envelope, when she saw the name on the letterhead, when she read the signature at the bottom of the page and understood, fully, completely, with no room for misunderstanding, whose name that was. I had been waiting 16 years for that moment. And I want to tell you something before I tell you anything else. This is not a story about revenge. I need you to understand that from the beginning, because if you listen to it as a revenge story, you will miss what it actually is. This is a story about a 19-year-old girl who had nothing and decided that nothing was going to be her starting point, not her ending point. About what happens when you take the worst thing someone has ever done to you and you refuse, absolutely refuse to let it be the last word. About what gets built in the space between the worst night of your life and the morning 16 years later when you finally understand what that night was actually for. My name is Jordan Elise Beaumont. I am 35 years old. I own a property management company in Atlanta, Georgia, with a portfolio of 11 residential properties across DeKalb and Fulton counties. I have 14 employees, a house I designed myself, and a life that I built from the ground up with my own hands and my own mind, and 16 years of choosing every single day to keep going, even when I couldn't see what I was going toward. And I want to tell you about the night it all started. The night my stepmother put a garbage bag full of my belongings on the front porch of my family's home and told me I was no longer welcome. I want to tell you about that night in detail, because I think the details matter. I think the details are where the truth lives. My father, Robert Beaumont, was a good man. I want to say that first because I think it matters, and because it would be easier to tell this story if he wasn't. It would be simpler, cleaner. The villain is easier to carry than the complicated man who loved you and still let you down. He was a good man who made a bad choice when I was 12 years old. He married a woman named Patricia, and he spent the next 7 years trying to make that choice work, which meant slowly, steadily choosing her version of reality over mine. Not all at once, not dramatically, the way water erodes stone. So gradually you don't notice until you look up one day and the landscape is completely different from what you remember. Patricia was beautiful and organized and relentlessly pleasant in public. She ran the household like a business, kept everything spotless, made sure my father's shirts were pressed and his meals were on time, and his social calendar was full of the right events with the right people. She was, by every external measure, an excellent wife. She was a different thing entirely behind closed doors. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment here, a look there. She thought I was messy. She thought I was ungrateful. She thought I had an attitude problem that needed correcting, and she took it upon herself to do the correcting, quietly and consistently, and always in ways that were just ambiguous enough that I could never point to one specific thing and say, there, that is what she is doing to me. My father traveled for work. He was in sales, on the road 3 or 4 days a week, and in those 3 or 4 days, Patricia ran the house exactly as she pleased, which meant I followed her rules, her schedule, her standards, and when I didn't meet them, which was often because they were designed to be impossible to meet, there were consequences, chores added, privileges removed, a coolness in the house that settled over everything like weather. Nothing that left marks, she was too careful for that. But there are ways to diminish a child that don't leave bruises, ways to make her feel unwelcome in her own home, unnecessary, inconvenient, ways to communicate over and over and over again that her presence is a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. My father didn't see it, or he saw it and didn't know what to do with what he saw, and chose the easier path of looking away. I have spent a long time trying to decide which one is true, and I still don't have a clean answer. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the result is the same either way. By the time I was 16, Patricia had 2 children of her own, twin boys, Marcus and Darius, who were adored in the way that children are adored when they are wanted completely and without reservation. The house reorganized itself around them. Their schedules, their needs, their moods became the rhythm of everything. I became background. Not invisible exactly, but present the way furniture is present, noticed only when it's in the way. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to. For a long time, the bitterness was so heavy I could barely breathe underneath it. But I have done enough work on myself to understand that what happened to me was not about my worth. It was about Patricia's insecurity and my father's avoidance and a family system that had cracks in it long before I was old enough to see them. But understanding something doesn't mean it didn't hurt, and it hurt. Every day, in the small ways and the large ones, it hurt. I was a good student in spite of everything, maybe because of everything. School was the one place where I could do something right, where the rules made sense and the results were based on effort rather than anyone's mood. I graduated in the top 15% of my class. I had been accepted to Georgia State on a partial scholarship. I had a plan. I had always had a plan, because people who feel unstable at home learn early that a plan is the closest thing to solid ground they're going to find. The night Patricia put my things on the porch, I was 19 years old and home for the summer after my freshman year. I don't know exactly what started it. Looking back, I don't think it matters. The fight was never really about what it appeared to be about. It was about everything that had been building for 7 years finally finding a door to walk through. Some things accumulate until they don't anymore, until they need somewhere to go. She said I was disrespectful. She said I had always been disrespectful, that I had come into her home and treated it and her like they were beneath me, and that she had tried for 7 years to make space for me, and I'd done nothing but make it difficult. She said she was done. She said she had talked to my father, and he agreed. My father was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He was still in his work clothes. He had his keys in his hand, like he had just come home, or like he was thinking about leaving. I looked at him across the hallway, and I waited for him to say something, to push back, to put his keys down and say, "That's not how we're doing this. That's not how we handle things in this family." He looked at the floor. That was the moment. Not Patricia's words. I had heard variations of Patricia's words for 7 years, and I had stopped expecting them to be anything other than what they were. The moment was my father looking at the floor. I did not cry. I remember being surprised by that. I had expected to cry, and then I didn't. I just felt something settle, like a question I had been asking for years had finally gotten an answer. I took the garbage bag off the porch. I walked to the end of the driveway. I stood there in the August heat. It was late, almost 10 o'clock, but the Atlanta summer doesn't care what time it is. And I had $43 in my pocket and a bag that held everything that was mine, and I made a decision. I decided that this was not the end of my story, that this specific, humiliating, heartbreaking moment was going to be the beginning of something. I didn't know what yet. I just knew that I was not going to let it be the last thing that happened to me. I was not going to let Patricia's worst night become the defining fact of my life. Calm. I called my friend, Deja. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Come over, I'll leave the light on." She didn't ask what happened, or whose fault it was, or whether I was okay. She just said, "Come over, and I'll leave the light on." I got a ride from a neighbor, and I went. Reflective. I stayed with Deja and her mother, Miss Carroll, for 3 months. Miss Carroll was a woman in her late 40s who had raised 4 children mostly on her own and had developed through that process a very clear sense of what actually mattered and what didn't. She asked very few questions, she expected hard work, and she made it clear that her home was a place for people who were going somewhere, not people who were sitting still. I cleaned her house, I helped with the groceries, I babysat her sister's children on weekends for $20 a time, which I saved completely. I went back to Gorgeous State in September with. It was not glamorous. The first tenants were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. The furnace went out twice that first winter, and I sat in my car at 2 in the morning on a February night, waiting for the emergency plumber I was paying out of my own savings. And I thought about Patricia, about the garbage bag, about the look on my father's face when he looked at the floor. And then I thought about Ms. Harriet's spreadsheets, about the 30 units she built from one duplex over 30 years, about the long game, about the fact that this cold parking lot at 2 in the morning was a data point, not a conclusion. I got back out of the car. I waited for the plumber. I paid the bill. I went home and updated my spreadsheet. The second property came at 29, third at 31. By 33, I had 6 properties, a team of 4 people, and a reputation in the DeKalb County investment community as someone who knew what she was doing and kept her word. By 34, I had 11 properties and 14 employees, and a company that had grown past the point where I had to be the one doing everything. I won't pretend it was easy. There were years when I was stretched financially and emotionally in ways that made me question whether I had started something I could actually finish. There were deals that fell through, tenants who destroyed units and disappeared, contractors who took deposits and didn't come back. There were months when I looked at my numbers at midnight and felt something very close to despair. But I had made a decision on a driveway in August when I was 19 years old, and I had never unmade it. Not once. Not in 16 years. I found out about the building in Stone Mountain by accident. I was at a networking event in Buckhead, the kind of quarterly thing where everyone is half networking and half pretending they don't need to be, talking to a commercial broker I had worked with on a deal the previous year. He mentioned a 12-unit residential building going to market, motivated seller, deferred maintenance, significantly under-rented. The current owner had held rents flat for years, and the building was producing maybe 60% of what it should have been. He gave me the address as an afterthought. I went very still. I knew that address. I knew the street, the block, the way the light fell on that building in the late afternoon when I walked past it on my way home from school. Brick exterior, mature trees along the sidewalk, a small parking lot in the back that I used to walk through sometimes because it felt more private than the main street. I had walked past that building for 6 years, every school day, for all of middle school and most of high school. My family's house, my father's house, Patricia's house, was 3 blocks away. I bought it 4 months later. The due diligence took 6 weeks. I brought in my contractor for a full assessment, budgeted for the deferred maintenance, modeled the rent increases against market comparables, and made an offer that reflected what the building actually was and what it was going to be. The seller accepted within 48 hours. The renovation took 8 months. New HVAC in 3 units, electrical updates in 2, new flooring in 4, cosmetic work throughout. I kept all existing tenants in place during the work and staged the timing to minimize disruption. It was the most complex project I had managed at that point, and I was on site more than I needed to be because I wanted to know every inch of that building. I knew my father's house was 3 blocks away. I did not drive past it during the renovation. I had not driven past it since the night I left, and I was not ready to do so yet. Some things you approach on your own timeline. The lease renewals went out on a Tuesday in October. Standard procedure, 60-day notice, updated terms, new management letterhead with my company name and my signature. Patricia received her envelope on a Wednesday afternoon. She called my father at his office. My father called his sister, my Aunt Renee, who had stayed in gentle, quiet contact with me for 16 years, in the way that some family members do when they disagree with what the family has done, but don't have the standing or the will to say so directly. Aunt Renee called me within the hour. She said, "Jordan, what did you do?" I said, "I bought a building, Aunt Renee." There was a pause long enough that I could hear her breathing. Then she said, "Your daddy is sitting in his car in the parking lot of his office right now. He called me 3 times. I said, "I know." She was quiet for another moment, and then, very softly, she said, "Baby, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes. I think for the first time in a long time, I actually am." My father called that evening, the first time he had called me without a specific occasion in over 2 years. His voice was different than I remembered, tighter, more careful, like a man who understood that he was walking into a room where he didn't know all the furniture. He said, "Jordan, you have to know how this looks." I said, "I know exactly how it looks, Dad. I bought a building that was for sale. I renovated it. I gave every tenant 60 days notice and a fair market lease. That's what happened." He said, "Patricia is devastated." I let that sit for a moment, and then I said, "Dad, I need you to think about what you just said to me. Your concern right now is that Patricia is devastated, and I need you to go back 16 years and think about what your concern was the night she put my things in a garbage bag, and then I need you to understand why I can only hold so much space for what Patricia is feeling right now." He didn't say anything. I said, "The lease terms are fair, market rate, not above it. If she wants to stay, she can stay. If she wants to go, she can go. That's her choice. I'm not doing anything to her. I'm just being her landlord." I hung up. I sat in my car for a long time after that call. People expect me to say I felt triumphant, complete, like the circle had closed in the most satisfying possible way. What I felt was sad. Not regret. I want to be clear about that distinction. I did not regret buying the building. I did not regret the renovation, the lease renewals, any of the 16 years of decisions that had led to that parking garage on that Thursday night. I did not regret any of it. But I felt sad about my father, about the specific loss of the man he had been before Patricia, when I was 11 and he was just my dad, and the world was smaller and safer than it turned out to be. I missed that man, the one who took me to get ice cream after report cards and taught me how to change a tire in our driveway and laughed at his own jokes before he got to the punchline. I don't know where he went. I only know he wasn't in the kitchen doorway that night when I needed him. Patricia did not contact me. I did not expect her to. She signed the new lease, 12-month term, market rate, same unit. She pays on the 1st of every month on time through the tenant portal my company uses. My property manager handles all communication. I have never spoken to her directly since the night she put the garbage bag on the porch. My father and I have spoken 4 times since the lease renewal, short conversations, careful, like 2 people who once knew each other well and are now feeling their way around a changed landscape, trying not to step on anything that will collapse. He has not apologized. I have not asked for one. I have thought about what an apology would even mean at this point, and I'm not sure I know. What I want from him is simple. I want him to know I am well, that I made it, that the girl on the driveway with the garbage bag and $43 built something real. I think he knows. I think that knowledge is part of what makes the conversations careful. Patricia renewed her lease last October. My property manager emailed me the signed documents as a routine update. I looked at her signature, Patricia Marie Beaumont, small and precise, for probably longer than I needed to, and then I filed it and went back to my day. People ask me sometimes whether I feel like I won, whether this is the ending I imagined when I was standing on that driveway. I tell them it's the wrong question, because winning implies there was a competition, and there was never a competition. Patricia was not my opponent. She was a woman who didn't want me in her house and had enough influence over a man I loved to make that feeling real. That's all she ever was. She is not my competition. She never was. My competition was always the version of myself that could have stayed small, that could have taken the garbage bag as a verdict, that could have looked at the floor the way my father looked at the floor and accepted that as the only available posture. What I am is built, brick by brick, year by year, dollar by dollar, choice by choice. Built from every hard thing that happened and every decision I made afterward, and every person who showed up when they didn't have to. Miss Carol leaving the light on, Deja answering on the second ring, Miss Harriet showing me her spreadsheets, Aunt Renee staying in touch for 16 quiet years. I own a building in Stone Mountain, Georgia, 3 blocks from where I grew up, 14 units, mature trees along the sidewalk, a small parking lot in the back that I used to walk through on my way home from school because it felt more private than the street. I had it painted last spring, a warm cream color that I chose myself, that I looked at samples for over a week until I found the one that was right. It looks exactly like what it is, something beautiful that someone built on purpose. If you are 19 years old right now, or 25, or 30, or 42, and someone has made you feel like where you are is where you will always be, like the worst thing that happened to you is a fact about your future rather than an event in your past, I need you to hear this. That is not a fact. That is their limitation, handed to you in the form of a verdict, and you do not have to accept it. You are not required to carry someone else's low opinion of you as if it were your own. You are allowed to be angry about what happened. You are allowed to grieve the childhood or the family or the safety you deserved and didn't get. All of that is real, and all of it deserves space and time and care. And then, when you're ready, in your own time, on your own terms, you are allowed to get up, to save the next dollar, to put on the consignment shop blazer and walk into the room you've never been in before, to call the person who answers on the second ring. You are not the garbage bag on the porch. You are not the floor your father looked at instead of you. You are not the worst thing that happened to you. You are the building. You just don't know it yet, but you will. If this story moved you, if it found you at the right moment, if it gave you something you needed, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Zuri Chronicles because every week we come back here and tell another story, another truth, another life that started in a hard place and refused to end there. My name is Zuri, and I'll see you next time.